Most Americans arrive in Canada expecting familiarity. The language sounds the same, stores look similar, streets feel familiar. Yet many Americans notice emotional distance within days. Conversations stay polite yet shallow. Smiles appear often, but connections feel slow. This distance does not come from rudeness. Canadian social behavior values space, restraint, and emotional control. In the United States, openness signals friendliness. In Canada, openness often feels intrusive. Americans grow up sharing opinions early, joking loudly, and filling silence fast. Canadian culture treats silence as comfort rather than tension. When an American speaks freely, a Canadian listener often responds with short affirmations rather than emotional engagement. This difference feels confusing. Americans start questioning themselves. Did I say something wrong? Did I overshare? The truth sits deeper. Canadian society prioritizes emotional boundaries in public life. Respect means giving others room rather than pulling closer. This creates a calm surface environment, yet newcomers struggle reading emotional signals. Many Americans misread politeness as warmth. Politeness functions differently here. Polite behavior protects personal space rather than inviting closeness. Understanding this difference prevents frustration. Emotional distance does not signal rejection. Emotional distance signals respect within Canadian social norms. Canadian reserved culture forms early through family, school, and community expectations. Children learn to avoid emotional extremes in public. Praise stays modest. Complaints stay private. Public scenes feel uncomfortable. Americans experience culture shock through subtle moments. A coworker listens quietly without sharing personal stories. A neighbor waves but never invites conversation. A friendly exchange ends quickly without follow-up. None of these moments signal dislike. Canadian society values predictability and emotional steadiness. Dramatic expression feels unnecessary. In American culture, sharing feelings builds trust. In Canada, consistency builds trust. Trust grows slowly through repeated calm interactions. This approach reduces conflict but slows bonding. Americans often interpret slow bonding as emotional coldness. Canadians interpret fast bonding as emotional pressure. Neither approach stands superior. Each system protects social harmony differently. Canadian restraint prevents conflict escalation. American openness accelerates connection. Problems arise when expectations clash. Americans push for depth too soon. Canadians pull back to preserve comfort. This push and pull creates emotional distance. Recognizing this pattern helps Americans adjust without self-doubt. Distance does not mean exclusion. Distance represents social pacing rather than emotional absence. Public spaces reveal emotional differences clearly. Canadian cities feel quieter even during busy hours. People speak softly, phone conversations stay brief, eye contact remains polite but short. Americans feel unseen. In the United States, eye contact signals acknowledgement. In Canada, prolonged eye contact feels invasive. Canadians acknowledge presence through subtle cues rather than direct engagement. A nod replaces conversation. A brief smile replaces greeting. Americans interpret silence as discomfort. Canadians interpret silence as mutual respect. This difference affects friendships. Americans seek emotional validation through verbal response. Canadians express comfort through consistency and reliability. Showing up matters more than sharing feelings. Remembering birthdays matters less than respecting time. Americans feel confused when emotional energy remains unmatched. Canadians feel pressured when emotional intensity rises fast. Neither side intends harm. Cultural wiring shapes expectations. Emotional distance emerges through misinterpretation rather than intention. Americans often feel lonely despite constant politeness. Canadians feel comfortable despite limited emotional exchange. Adjusting expectations prevents disappointment. Emotional warmth appears differently across cultures. Workplace culture amplifies emotional distance. Canadian offices emphasize professionalism and boundaries. Colleagues avoid personal topics early. Conversations focus on tasks rather than personal stories. Americans often bond through shared struggles and humor. Canadian teams bond through reliability and respect. Oversharing personal challenges feels inappropriate early. Emotional neutrality maintains harmony. Americans feel disconnected without emotional rapport. Canadians feel stable without emotional disclosure. This difference affects feedback. Canadians soften criticism carefully. Americans expect directness paired with encouragement. Misunderstandings grow when tone feels distant. Americans assume lack of enthusiasm. Canadians assume professionalism. Trust builds through long-term consistency rather than immediate connection. Americans switching careers or cities feel this gap strongly. Familiar workplace warmth disappears. Silence replaces banter. Over time, bonds form quietly through shared routine rather than emotional exchange. Americans who wait patiently experience deeper trust later. Rushing connection creates resistance. Understanding workplace norms prevents isolation. Emotional distance protects fairness and privacy within professional spaces. Friendship development follows a slower rhythm in Canada compared to American expectations. Canadians rarely invite new acquaintances into their private life quickly, viewing home invitations as signals of deep trust rather than casual interest. Americans often invite friends home early as a sign of openness and warmth. Canadians view home space as personal sanctuary reserved for established relationships. Socializing often happens outdoors, in cafes, or through carefully planned activities rather than spontaneous gatherings. Spontaneous hangouts feel rare and can even seem presumptuous. Americans interpret this measured approach as lack of interest or enthusiasm. Canadians interpret planning as respect for others' time and boundaries. Friendship grows through repetition and shared experiences over months. Shared routines matter significantly more than emotional confessions or vulnerability early in relationships. A weekly walk or coffee ritual builds trust better than deep conversations attempted prematurely. Americans feel emotionally starved during early stages, missing the warmth they're accustomed to. Canadians feel comfortable maintaining surface-level connection until trust solidifies organically. This mismatch creates emotional distance that frustrates both parties. Adjusting pace reduces frustration and misunderstanding. Allowing friendships to unfold slowly leads to deeper, more resilient bonds later. Canadians value loyalty quietly rather than loudly, demonstrating commitment through consistent presence over time. Media and national identity continuously reinforce emotional restraint throughout Canadian culture. Canadian identity emphasizes humility, modesty, and calmness as core values. Standing out feels uncomfortable and socially inappropriate. Expressing strong emotion publicly attracts unwanted attention and feels excessive. Americans celebrate individuality and emotional expression as positive traits. Emotional presence feels natural and encouraged in American contexts. Canadians prioritize social harmony and collective comfort over emotional visibility and individual expression. This mindset fundamentally shapes daily interactions across all settings. Compliments feel restrained and understated rather than effusive. Celebrations feel modest and measured rather than exuberant. Reactions feel carefully calibrated and controlled. Americans interpret this restraint as lack of enthusiasm or genuine engagement. Canadians interpret emotional restraint as maturity and social awareness. Emotional distance protects equality and reduces potential social tension. Nobody dominates emotional space or demands excessive attention. Americans accustomed to expressive affirmation struggle adjusting to this quieter environment. Silence replaces constant validation and verbal reassurance. Calm replaces excitement and animated reactions. Over time, Americans who successfully adapt notice unexpected benefits: reduced social pressure and performance anxiety, fewer emotional confrontations and conflicts, lower overall emotional fatigue from constant expression. Emotional distance provides breathing room rather than creating isolation. Understanding the motivation behind restraint transforms initial frustration into genuine appreciation. Emotional distance in Canada does not mean absence of care or concern for others. Care appears consistently through actions rather than words or declarations. Canadians show concern by respecting personal space, honoring schedules and commitments, and offering help quietly without fanfare. Americans seek reassurance through verbal expression and emotional availability. Canadians offer reassurance through reliability, consistency, and dependable behavior over time. Cultural adjustment requires fundamentally redefining what emotional connection looks and feels like. Americans succeed by slowing their expectations, carefully observing behavioral patterns, and valuing consistency over intensity. Asking fewer personal questions early in relationships helps significantly. Listening more than speaking builds trust more effectively. Accepting silence as comfortable rather than awkward reduces ongoing anxiety. Over time, emotional depth emerges naturally without forcing vulnerability. Bonds formed slowly through repeated interaction often last longer and feel more stable. Emotional distance serves as a protective filter rather than an impenetrable barrier. Canadians protect their emotional energy carefully and deliberately. Americans who learn this fundamental difference stop feeling personally rejected or unwanted. Emotional connection still exists abundantly, simply expressed differently through actions and reliability. Once expectations align with cultural reality, life in Canada feels calmer, safer, and quietly supportive rather than emotionally distant or cold. The adjustment transforms perception completely.